ABC News Special Report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air with a major development in Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into former President Trump. Former President Trump has been informed at this hour that he has been indicted by a federal grand jury regarding the special counsel's probe into Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. I want to bring in John Santucci, who's covered Donald Trump for years from us. John, you have confirmed from multiple sources that the former president and his legal team has been informed?
David, my colleague Catherine Faulders and I are told just moments ago Donald Trump and his legal team received a call from special counsel Jack Smith's team informing them that the grand jury that was hearing a presentation by special counsel Jack Smith's team regarding Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election did return an indictment against the former president, David. He has been indicted in that investigation. And David, as we've been reporting here for some time, it was just a little over 2 weeks ago now that a target letter was sent to former President Donald Trump informing him that he was a target of the special counsel's probe on 2020 election overturning efforts and the January 6th riot. And it was just at the end of last week, David, that Trump's lawyers went in for a meeting with the special counsel to talk about that case. And now, just 4 business days later, that indictment has been returned by a federal grand jury in Washington, David.
John, stick with us here. Presumably, obviously, his legal team meeting with special counsel. We know Jack Smith was in that meeting just a couple of days ago. They were trying to make the case as to why the former president should not be criminally indicted in this case. Again, Jack Smith working on parallel tracks here. 2 criminal investigations now, one involving the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and now we have just learned that a federal grand jury has handed up so far a sealed indictment. We don't know the actual charges in this indictment as of yet. But if the target letter was any indication as to what could be coming here just moments from now, these would be the most serious charges that any American president has ever faced, given the fact that it relates to the alleged attempts to overturn a presidential election. Again, we don't have the list of charges yet. All we know is that that grand jury has handed up a federal criminal indictment, that former President Trump and his legal team has been informed that this indictment has been handed up. I want to bring in our senior reporter, Catherine Faulders, who works with our investigative team. And Catherine, you are among the reporters here on the team confirming that the former president has been reached. And again, I go back to that target letter, which strongly hinted at the kinds of charges that the former president could face here.
Yeah, it did. And we don't know, David, as you said, what charges or how many counts are in this indictment. But if the target letter, which he received 2 weeks ago, is to be any sort of guide, we know that those include some conspiracy charges. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, for example, is one of those. But again, important to emphasize, we don't know. This indictment is sealed. We're learning this through sources, and it's at this courthouse right behind me where this grand jury has been meeting for over a year now. They met today rather late. There were lots of tea leaves to read inside this courthouse. We saw jurors milling about, going in and out, leaving. Some prosecutors potentially were here. So what we know is that the 4-person was spotted inside this courthouse, and that's the only juror that they need to hand up this indictment to the judge. So that is what we're told happened, and we know that the former president has been informed. His lawyers have been informed. They're also just waiting, of course, on this indictment to be unsealed.
Catherine Faulders, John Santucci, both reporting at this hour. At least 2 separate sources here reporting the former president has been informed that he has been criminally indicted involving January 6th and efforts to overturn the 2020 election. 4 counts we have just learned. 4 counts in this federal criminal indictment. This is 45 pages long. I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, who is looking at it right now. Pierre, what do you know?
David, we have the specific charges. United States of America versus Donald Trump. Conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Obstruction and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And conspiracy against rights. We're going to be looking through this specifically, but basically this case is a speaking indictment laying out a case that Donald Trump was very clear that he lost the election and then proceeded to try to take the election from the American public. That's the generic case. We'll just have to read through the specifics and how they lay out the specifics, but it will be a speaking indictment laying out the case that Donald Trump was aware that he lost. There was no wide-scale fraud. He was clear on that and then took steps to stop the certification of Joe Biden as president of the United States.
And just for people watching our live coverage right now, Donald Trump now a second federal criminal indictment from the special counsel Jack Smith. Many in the legal world, Dan Abrams included, have said that if there was an indictment in this case, that this is even far more serious than the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. And perhaps one of the reasons why, Pierre, you just lasered in on this notion that the former president knew that he lost the election, according to Jack Smith and federal prosecutors. That's the psychological component here, that he knew and yet continued to move forward with strategy to somehow hold on to the White House.
And David, we have to be careful until we read the specifics. But to be clear here, they're suggesting that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, in office, was using the power of the presidency to retain power, to basically block the peaceful transfer of power. This is something that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, talked about over and over again, that they would hold anyone accountable who attempted to unlawfully block the peaceful transfer of power.
I want to bring in Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst. Dan, when you hear these charges, 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, and deprivation of rights, the right to vote, that your vote would count. Yep. These are very serious charges.
Yeah, and now we have some detail as we read through this indictment in real time here. A conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified by the federal government. That is the one, the defrauding of the United States, a conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified. That is another account, a conspiracy against the right to vote and have one's vote counted. That's more of a catch-all one, where it's been used a number of times in the 20th century, which is interesting that it's about voter fraud. It's about basically saying, you know, in other cases where people were stuffing ballots, et cetera, and saying that deprived everyone else of the right to have the votes counted fairly. And that is now something that Donald Trump is being charged with in this indictment, which is one of the big picture pockets that we have to look at here.
And David, can I add one thing here? They're clearly stating that the fake electors, this attempt to bring in fake electors, was part of a plan to defraud the American public with false statements to make them think that Trump, in fact, had won when he had lost.
Pierre, I want to read this for our viewers watching this. This is the indictment just in, and again, you heard Dan there list briefly what these 4 counts would be after an initial readout from Pierre. But I just want to read the beginning of this speaking indictment. You heard Pierre reference that. We have seen this before from Jack Smith. It's what they call, in essence, a speaking indictment means to lay out in lay terms so that the rest of us and viewers, voters across this country could, in essence, understand why Jack Smith and his team are taking this action. Carefully laid out here for people at home even to read. 45 pages. I'm not going to read it all, but I will read the very beginning. It says the defendant, Donald J. Trump, was the 45th president of the United States and a candidate for re-election in 2020. The defendant lost the 2020 presidential election. Despite having lost, Jack Smith says the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. John Carl, that is a significant part of Jack Smith's argument, and it goes to some of what the January 6th committee put before the American people, some of what you have reported, the psychology of the former president, and those in his inner circle who testified before the American people that this was a president who knew he lost.
I mean, we remember the January 6th committee was almost entirely hearing from Republicans, and many of those Republicans, people close to Donald Trump, who testified over and over again that they told him that the election was over and that he had lost. David, I had a very senior Republican in that Congress tell me just about a week or so after the election, he is a man who knows he lost, and it is hard on him. But I want to tell you, there are also 6 co-conspirators that are listed in this. They're not named, but they are described. 4 of them are lawyers. 1 of them is a Justice Department official, and another is a political consultant, all being described as helping him to implement this scheme. And this again, this is not just about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. This is about a coordinated, comprehensive effort led by the President of the United States to overturn an election that he knew he lost.
Let me just take this one step further, Dan, and then I'll bring it to you, because Jack Smith lays this out very carefully. I had mentioned that in this indictment, he says the defendant knew that these claims were false, but the defendant repeatedly and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election, Dan.
David, I was just going to say, the indictment goes state by state and basically talks about exactly what Donald Trump did and said, because that's the key, right? I mean, you can make an allegation about the fake electors, right, and say these people, for example, some of them have been charged in Michigan for their conduct, but you still have to show Donald Trump's role in this, that he knew what he was doing and that he was actually taking actions in connection with this. And the indictment goes through point by point about the calls he was making, calling the leaders in Arizona, calling leaders in Michigan, et cetera. And that's the key here, is to be looking for Donald Trump himself's actions, not just the broader. We've known for a long time about the issue of these electors. The question's always been exactly what did Donald Trump do?
They said, they actually make the point, though, in this indictment, and I want to add here, that the defendant, Donald Trump, had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election that he had won. He can claim that, they say. He's entitled to formally challenge the results of the election lawfully through appropriate means. But they go on to say, indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods, I should say, of contesting the election results. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. And in many cases, John, as we reported on numerous occasions, these were Republican-appointed judges who said, there's nothing here.
Most of them, some of them appointed by Trump himself. But what is significant here also is it outlines who told Trump that what he was doing and what he was saying was untrue. And it's pretty comprehensive. We've known some of this, but they go through the defendant's vice president. By the way, the role of Vice President Pence is critical in this indictment. The pressure that Trump put on Pence to use his power in presiding over the certification of those ballots on January 6th is critical here. But the vice president told him it was wrong. Senior Justice Department officials that he had appointed to the Justice Department told him that the election was not stolen. The Department of Homeland Security, senior White House attorneys, senior staffers on his own re-election campaign, state legislatures and officials, almost all of them Republicans, told him, no, the election was not stolen. The results are certified. We have no power to overturn it. And he continued to persist in pressuring them to use their positions to overturn an election that was over.
Yeah, an extraordinary list of names and figures very close to the former president who repeatedly told him that he had lost the election. We know that Mike Pence, the former vice president, sitting across from me, well, I point blank said, did you tell the president he lost? We lost here. And he said on numerous occasions, I made that very clear to the former president.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.